Good afternoon, everyone. Thank you, Lauren. Can everyone hear me? So, I'm quite excited about this presentation, mostly because it's, I suppose, the end of the day. So, it's the one way we can check if everyone's still here. So, I must also thank you for your patience and your bravery for braving the graveyard shift. As Llewellyn said, I'm here to present what was supposed to be a roadmap for net zero carbon buildings in the public sector in South Africa. However, I think that will be quite presumptuous because these are the inputs, these are the direct inputs of a Green Cafe dialogue we had this week, hence the tiredness on my part. And if I cough, once again, I excuse myself beforehand. So a bit of myself. My name is Songo Didiza. I'm the co-founder of Green Building Design Group. The Green Building Design Group is a partner in the green economy in South Africa. And we're a partner particularly in creating an adaptive and inclusive green economy. So when we talk about adaptive, we're largely talking about, for the longest time in the South African green economy, it's been a climate mitigation story. I think the common thought and the common discussions that have been coming out of the conference is there's a very clear understanding that we're now in adaptation phase. We saw Cape Town almost ran out of water. We saw not just Cape Town, the Eastern Cape as well. Other regions of the country, KZN, is also just one of the places in the country that are facing one of the most extreme conditions of climate change. So now we're no longer talking a mitigation story, we're talking an adaptation story. And of course, while we're creating this green economy as well, we need to be ensuring that we're creating an inclusive one for all South Africans. A bit about myself and I guess the team. We started this company about 2 years ago, but the combined team experience of the organization is over 40 years in the green economy in South Africa. I call myself a green economist by trade and economist by training. And my partner in the organization, I call it the standards king, specifically the king and not the queen. Ms. Lisa Reynolds, who has been one of the pioneers of transforming the energy efficiency landscape in the country. So I want to shift it back now to the discussion of the day, which is driving the net zero carbon agenda in the public sector. And also just to bring in some context into the matter. We know that green buildings are now beyond a trend. It's become the norm. I think the last numbers that were quoted by the Green Building Council, they were sitting at 300 certifications plus and rising of Green Star rated buildings. So we quite know that green buildings are now the norm. It's no longer a fancy trend, it actually is the norm because of the economics involved. But in terms of the policy context, we know that the country has a national development plan that's looking at driving the zero carbon agenda. And we also know that the country also has a national energy efficiency strategy. This was recently revised and was published last year, for those of you who might know. And then obviously on a more global picture, South Africa is also signatory to the Paris Agreement of 2015. We know that there's 17 sustainable development goals, and of these 17 goals, the country is a signatory to ensure that we are part of that adaptation story. So why should we, but wait, what is net zero carbon? I mentioned earlier on that green buildings are now the norm. And we're now at the most pressing times of climate change, where we now have to be our most adaptive in terms of response to climate change, which is why our Green Building Council of this country and several other Green Building Councils have come together and said they want to advance net zero. They want to up the ante. They want to ensure that we are we've strapped up in terms of how we're going to respond to climate change. And that is why, essentially, why they've adopted the net zero agenda. And if we look at the definition, I'll borrow the Green Building Council of South Africa's definition of net zero carbon. And that one is really, really clear. And it says, net zero carbon building is one that is highly energy efficient, and the remaining energy use is from renewable energy, preferably on-site, but also off-site. We are absolutely necessary so that there are net zero carbon emissions on an annual basis. I remember from our session yesterday, the Green Cafe Dialogue, the executive director of Green Building Council was saying it took them 8 months to come up with that definition, because there was a lot of to and fro in terms of what the common consensus would be in terms of the net zero agenda. But without being too multi-layered in terms of what this thing needs to be, the pathway for net zero is now set. And we are now at a point where the policies are also starting to align in terms of where the cities have decided to go, and that what's very clear is that by 2050, all buildings should be net zero carbon. But also, before we get there, we need to just see where South Africa is performing. I had a chat with Manfred earlier this morning, and he's confirmed that there are 4 projects already in South Africa that have been certified as net zero carbon. They have now these different levels, but that they use for the certification. But it's good to know that South Africa is right in the mix in terms of where the net zero carbon agenda is concerned. But now I asked Manfred, this is great news. However, where does the public sector sit in all of this? Are we going to be left behind, as was the case with the first wave of driving energy efficiency in buildings in South Africa? I mean, we all remember the first energy crisis we had, and everybody had to start strapping up in terms of how they were going to mitigate. And when I asked him this question, I said, well, you're quite right. We have to start engaging the public sector from the get-go. In fact, public sector has to be leading by example with regards to the net zero carbon agenda. Now, I'm an economist. I say, let's look at the numbers. I borrowed these numbers from a report that was done by the Property Sector Charter Council of South Africa, a report they released in 2015 that estimated the property sector's contribution to our GDP. And in their report, they estimated the property sector to be valued at 5.8 trillion rand. And that's the broader property sector. Of that 5.8 trillion rand, the public sector is 247 billion rand. It doesn't seem too big a prize. However, I think our previous speaker, Tommy, was saying, without government, we can't expect to be delivering sustainable projects if we're going to leave them behind in this journey. So once again, I ask that question. Is net zero going to incorporate the public sector? Should it? It should. And that was the whole purpose of our discussion yesterday, which was really, we took the city of Tshwane. You've all seen the banners outside. The city has committed to the C40 Cities South Africa program, I think, of which Sustainable Energy Africa, I think there were some people from Sustainable Energy Africa here today. I know Stanley presented earlier, so I won't delve too much in terms of what that program entails. But the city has made a clear mission that they are going to commit towards net zero carbon beyond 2020. So what we did in the Green Cafe dialogue yesterday, we said, let's bring some stakeholders, some key stakeholders that are involved in the net zero carbon discussion. The people, C was one of the people that were involved, Green Building Council, who were one of the forefront runners in terms of what's happening in the country, some people from academia, some private sector, and we said, how is the city going to respond to zero carbon? And we had some back and fro, we had some really strong discussions. But what was very clear from the discussions was that there needs to be a stronger collaboration between, in order to ensure seamless integration. We know there's the big elephant in the room with regards to our current, I was having a chat with Llewellyn right now, with regards to our current building efficiency standards. How is this new growth path going to integrate itself into that? It's going to be a very complicated process, and that's going to require some intense engagements with all the various stakeholders involved. And obviously, when we're talking about government, we're largely talking about 3 spheres. We're not just talking about the city agenda. Some of the things that happen at national will directly impact what happens at the city level. I don't want to get too boggled down. However, I want to go back to my point that says, yes, the public sector is very key to this discussion. And how we can do that is if the private sector continuously is sharing some of the information of the public sector. And how we've introduced this on our side is I mentioned our involvement in the building efficiency training, or maybe I didn't mention it. We introduced the pilot workshop that was geared at the building control officers in the country. And C40 cities, were there in that workshop about 2 months ago. And the whole point of this workshop was to, now that we're committing to this net zero carbon journey as a country, and the cities are starting to adopt it, where are we on the current efficiency standards? Which you all know here, those from the building controls and the building departments would know that since 10400 XA, which is a mandatory standard that needs to be adopted by everyone in the building sector, knows that. So what we did was we took about 5 municipalities from the Gauteng. We had municipal representatives from Kuruleni. We had City of Tshwane, obviously. We had Mfuleni and 2 other municipalities from the region. And what we did was while we did the training, is we had a shared learning component where the municipalities got an opportunity to share with each other some of the challenges that they were having with the current XA standard. And before we can talk zero carbon, before we can talk green, let us understand, let us have a clear consensus in terms of what the issues are on the things that we have to do, the mandatory stuff. And that is where this journey has started. But also, I just want to put a point of reflection. When we looked at the XA standard, and this is based on the Clay Brick Association was here earlier on, we looked at the impact that the introduction of the standard has had on our construction sector in South Africa. It's created massive investments, it's created new industries, and that's good. But once we ramp things up, imagine how this picture could look with a net zero carbon agenda. But are we ready? And City of Tshwane believes that they are. From the rich conversations that we had yesterday through our green cafes. Perhaps maybe let me explain what a green cafe is. So the whole point of a green cafe is we'll have somebody pose a challenge, as in the case of the City of Tshwane. They said they want to go beyond 2020, they want to go beyond minimum performance, they want to go towards net zero carbon. And we took that challenge and we posed it to some sustainability experts that helped us break down what that meant to the participants in the session. And the whole point of that is to, once again, promote shared learning and use those shared learning inputs, and use those shared learning inputs to feed back into the client, which is City of Tshwane in this case. And one of the outcomes, I'm going to rush because I've been told to rush. One of the outcomes of that session was that a pathway was developed for the city in terms of what their net zero carbon journey is going to be. That is currently in draft form right now. It kind of looks like that because this was done yesterday. But what we're hoping it will look like is something that looks a bit more coordinated, like what's on the right. And what was very clear is that the first step that needs to be taken is that we need to have a clear understanding of what these targets are going to be. We need to map out all the stakeholders that need to be engaged. And then once again, when we're talking about net zero carbon city, we're not just talking about net zero carbon buildings in the city of Tshwane. We're talking about a net carbon city that's going to cross-map with the nodes, with the transport sector, ensure that all the stakeholders that are involved in a city's development are engaged. And how are we going to do this? I mentioned the draft report that was developed. That report is going to be shared with all of you, with all the stakeholders that are involved in the built environment. We are going to take the lessons learned from the Green Cafe Tshwane dialogue. We're going to take that to the GBCSA convention in October, where we're going to open up the net zero carbon mission to other cities that have signed up to the C40 South Africa building program to ensure, once again, shared learning and to make sure that we are all on the same page when we talk about net zero carbon in the public sector, particularly at a city level. And the last thing that I'm quite excited about is net zero carbon hackathon, where we're going to invite entrepreneurs to come up with tangible solutions in terms of how we're going to move forward on the net zero carbon journey beyond 2020 for South African cities. And that's taking place on the 28th of August. So I'd like to leave you all, our partners for the Green Cafe at Tshwane was obviously Sustainability Week, which I am proud to also share. I saw on the program that they are a carbon neutral event. So we are all participating in a carbon neutral event. And those are some of our co-facilitators that were involved in the Green Cafe session yesterday. Green Building Council, Solid Green, Nuvo Energy, obviously the city, and Tomorrow Matters Now. And I'd like to leave you all with this very profound African proverb. If you want to go together, if you want to go quickly, you go alone. But if you want to go far, you go together. Thank you.